We have big One Piece live action news that is going to make Season 2 a very high risk, high reward endeavor. Season 2 will make or break live action One Piece because they've chosen a very exciting, however, very perilous path. Why was that hard to say? And all of this came to us, as most things do, in the form of a message from story god Eiichiro Oda. Yes, the live-action One Piece is currently in production with filming well underway. The story will cover Log Town, Reverse Mountain, Whiskey Peak, Little Garden, and Drum Island. You might notice a certain island is missing from that list. So this is Oda confirming that Alabasta will not be part of Season 2 and may in fact be a whole season of its own, and all of our focus is now on setting up Drum Island as the climax of Season 2. And I think that this is a good decision considering the production restraints. Because, this is going to be a bit of a downer, but this is my personal philosophy on One Piece live action. There is no amount of time and money that could ever perfectly bring the One Piece world to real life. That's why it is a comic book. So POV, you, viewer, are the showrunner. It's your job to bring this world to life. Except you have no control over the budget, you have no control over the episode count, and you have no control over the time you have to produce these episodes. All of that is decided by high-up entities well beyond your pay grade. So in this situation, it is essentially your job to make the best bad decision. There are no good decisions to be made here. There is good decision-making to take place, but no good decisions. Because whatever you choose to do is going to risk compromising One Piece in one way or another. Because you can go with option A, you can try and cram Alabasta into Season 2 and blitzkrieg the saga into a rushed mess, which it definitely would have been, or you can go with option B. You can end the season early, have a much better amount of time to flesh out the characters and the world, but at the risk of producing an underwhelming finale, because Drum Island, it is a lovely arc. I love Drum, love things, but it is not a series climax. They're both bad choices, and I do really feel for the team being put in this position. But again, I think that ending the season with Drum is the best bad choice, because one of the key complaints about Season 1 is how ridiculously rushed everything is, to the point where you've got stuff like Usopp not even particularly being featured in his own arc. And especially towards the end, to me personally, the Arlong arc in the live action is an unrecognizable mess of compromise. However, here is a very fun fact about the Arlong arc in the live action. It's 2 episodes, right? You'd think that, but it's actually more like an episode and a half, because the other half of episode 8 was about wrapping up the series as a whole. We were done with Arlong in like 20 minutes. And due to that, in the live action, we actually spend more time on Syrup Village than we did dealing with Arlong. And that is the kind of horrendous misbalance that I think this decision is trying to fix, because it would be an incredible disservice to Alabasta if it ended up the same way. And I know that showrunner Matt Owens at the very least is incredibly conscious of this, because he has publicly spoken out about what happened with the Arlong arc. So this discussion gets a bit industrial. But for anyone unaware, the writers and actors strikes of 2023 were called while these last 2 episodes were being edited, meaning that those 2 episodes were never actually finished, at least not according to Matt Owens.
One of the things that was kind of weird for me also is watching the show without having to finish the edit, because we shot much more Usopp content, especially in episodes 7 and 8, that actually made it into the show. There's a whole thing about Usopp in episode 7, like really starting to craft some of his specialty rounds, and there were a lot more aspects to the Chew fight. You know, that moment of him hiding and like psyching himself out and being like, everyone else is counting on me. Everyone else is standing up. Like, I've got to stand up. We shot all of that stuff. So I don't know why it didn't make it into the show. I miss it also, but I wasn't there to finish editing.
So he's as confused as I was by the state that the Arlong arc ended up being, which is both comforting and worrying. Comforting because at least I know that what happens there wasn't intentional, but also worrying because he was one of the key people in charge of this $100 million project. And I don't want to get too deeply into the politics of the strikes, because there was a situation where Matt Owens also publicly called his co-showrunner Steven Maeda a scab for doing interviews during the strikes.
Not going to be promoting anything. We're not going to be talking about anything we're not supposed to.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. Yeah.
We're not going to do it. But if you guys want some scab interviews, there's a different co-showrunner I can point you to, but we're not going to be doing that today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're not going to be doing that today.
Yeah, okay.
Despite the fact that Matt also did interviews about the live action during the writer's strike on both Nuxanor's channel and Randy Troy's channel. But look, I don't know, there's probably lots of industrial fine prints and rules and regulations for why it was okay in his case and not okay in another case. I don't really care. I mean, I do care a bit because, it's sweet, interesting drama, this showrunner feud. But what it also boils down to is that it's an internal dispute in an industry I don't work in, based in a country I don't live in. And so what I care about much more are the results. And the results are that, for all intents and purposes, what we have is a first cut of those last 2 episodes, put together by editors who don't have the depth of knowledge that the showrunner had, and without the direction of the showrunner. The showrunner is like the captain. You need that oversight, especially in the case of One Piece, because things can go wrong very easily. But to be fair, there is also a lot of blame to be thrown directly at Netflix as well, because they did originally order 10 episodes of season 1, which was later cut down to 8. And if you look at the original leak of those 10 episode titles, it looks like Arlong was originally supposed to be 3 episodes instead of 1.5, and they also wanted to cover Logtown as well. All of which is a ridiculously long-winded way of saying that if Netflix insists for whatever reason on this 8-episode model, then this season 2 decision is the only way to go. Because trying to do too much too quickly led to massive problems with East Blue in season 1. Problems which I think were mostly masked by the cultural event that was a Western live action not being a complete and utter embarrassment. However, season 2 won't have that cultural milestone to hide behind, and so I do really appreciate that the team are focusing on slowing things down and hopefully taking the time to really explore this world and its characters. Even if the ending is less climactic than season 1, I still feel like it's the better decision. However, it does come with howevers, because there is a big risk to betting the house on Drum Island. Firstly, it's very unfortunate, but the presence of Crocodile now gets mostly bumped back to season 3. I mean, he'll probably be in season 2 to some degree as a voice or a dude in the shadows giving orders and such. But unless he makes a surprise appearance on Drum Island like Arlong did on Baratier, he's not really on the cards anymore, which is a shame because he is a character with the presence and charisma that we need to command a saga, and with Crocodile gone, that role is going to have to be given to someone else. I say this all the time in actual One Piece, but arcs are only as good as their villains. And if we don't have a good, then what we have is a bad. So what we're looking at doing is building up someone as like a season 2 mini-boss. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of great choices. The obvious answer is Warpole, because he's the main antagonist of Drum Island, but unless they radically change his character into a much more competent and intimidating villain, I feel like going all in on him would be incredibly ill-advised. I love Warpole, but he is so incapable of helming a project like this that when Toei did the Drum Island remake movie, they actually had to create a new antagonist, Warpole's older brother Mushuru, because it was judged that Warpole just wasn't strong enough in any respect to helm a film. But there is another choice, and look, this might sound a bit insane at first, but what if the main antagonist of season 2 is Mr. 3? He's the highest ranking Baroque Works agent that we encounter pre-Alabasta, and you could do quite a bit with his grotesque pursuit of art, maybe tone down how wacky he is, and on Little Garden he did genuinely almost wipe out the Straw Hats. So you could build him up to be a big end of series threat, or he could just become another Buggy like in the actual series. A kind of threatening but mostly wacky man. But again, every One Piece arc, it is only as good as its antagonist. And at this point, I just can't imagine getting $100 million check from Netflix and saying, mate, you know what we should spend this cash on? That's right, Warpole. Everyone loves Warpole. But this is another example of making the best bad decision, because both Warpole and Galdino are two of the weaker entries into the pantheon of One Piece villains, and we now need to weigh these guys up and make another best bad choice. Because man, landing on these two is like playing poker and deciding to go all in on a low-ranking hand like a pair of nines. Not horrible, it could win, but it's not the strong straight flush that a Crocodile would have been. It should be quite interesting at the very least though, because this is going to result in a massive formulaic departure from the One Piece we know. I also imagine it's going to bless the season 2 budget, because if they did try to tackle Alabasta, then that is a hell of a lot of Chopper that they would have needed to do. Whereas now in season 2, Chopper acts like more of a proof of concept for the more difficult task of using him during Alabasta and beyond. And also Alabasta itself, it's good to put that to one side budgetarily, because I hear that filming full-scale civil wars can be quite an expensive endeavor. And I guess this means that Alabasta now becomes its own season, which it absolutely could be. Alabasta is 63 chapters long, so that's about 8 chapters an episode, and that's not accounting for all the stuff that they add in, like all the B stories and such. Which, if you add up everything in season 1 involving Kobe, Garp, and Helmeppo, they take up almost an entire episode of screen time during the season, meaning that East Blue effectively only only got 7 episodes to be adapted. So with that in mind, it would be more like 7 episodes for 63 chapters, which feels a lot better to me than 7 episodes for 90-something chapters. And to put that into some perspective, the 63 chapters of Alabasta is longer than the entirety of what's being done for season 2, which even including Logtown is 60 chapters. So if that amount is good enough for season 2, then surely it works for a full season of Alabasta as well. I often think that fans have a tendency to misremember just how big and intricate Alabasta was, and it's mind-boggling to me that some people on the internet think that this can be crammed into 2 or even 3 episodes. This is wild. Toei tried that with the Alabasta movie. It didn't work. It was horrible. And I think their minds go straight to the fights and think about how quickly we could get through those instead of how much needed to be set up for those fights to take place. And what needs to be done with Alabasta is what live-action One Piece Season 1 failed to do, and take the time to focus on the residents of the island to build the conflict worth getting into a punch fight over. But that's Season 3 talk. That's also what they need to do for Season 2. This is the point where they can't get away with just cutting out side characters we meet along the way or making them cameo appearances, because these side characters are now the foundation and lifeblood of the story itself. And look, being pretty realistic about this, there is a great chance that One Piece live action doesn't even make it past Season 3. 3 seasons is a lot for a Netflix show, especially one of this cost. And maybe if they start seeing diminishing returns, then they won't be so keen on continuing to spend $100 million a season. So with that in mind, I would personally much rather that the live action did everything possible to represent the Alabasta saga with the depth that it deserves, instead of blindly rushing ahead to desperately try to get to Skypiea or Ward 7. Because if they did that, then those arcs aren't going to be any good either. Seriously, if we cannot get Alabasta right, to me there's no point in continuing. But also again, this strategy is a massive risk, because ending the season at Drum Island, if not done to perfection, could risk depressing interest in the future of the show. Because it might not be a satisfying conclusion to a series that you need to then wait another year or even 2 to move forward with. And that dissatisfaction could end up being the catalyst that prompts Netflix to pull the plug. So I don't know, once again, I default to my philosophy that there are no good decisions to be made here. Both paths forward lead to substandard outcomes due to the production medium and restrictions. However, this was definitely the best bad decision that could have been made. I get that this video probably sounds quite negative. I think that's just my tone in general with live action, but I'm actually genuinely excited that they're slowing down. It was 100% the right lesson to take away from season 1. But all of that I've just said is part 1 of Oda's message, which continues. Think about it. Imagine how much it'll cost, lol. But whether it's the script or the cast, I continue to insist on this or that, which makes Matt the showrunner go, ah, and Netflix go, no, and Tomorrow Studios go, what? As they pull their hairs out. All that even though we grew so close making season 1. Meanwhile, the previously announced cast is compiled on the official X account, so go check it out. The grand line is an even more expansive world. You may wonder, what was the inspiration behind that kingdom? How would it connect to the real world? We're gonna pause here because when I first read this part of the message, I thought it was real weird. I wasn't quite sure what Oda was trying to say, but I'm pretty sure that kingdom refers to Alabasta. And after some recent cast announcements, I feel like this is marketing trying to erect a preemptive barrier. So what I'm referring to here is the announcement of Vivian Cobra, who were to be played by Charithra Chandran and Sendil Ramamurthy. I apologize if I butchered either of those names. I am but mere Australian swine. All I know how to say properly is g'day and mate. But there has been some online backlash to these announcements from people questioning why the royalty of the Egypt-based nation isn't Egyptian or otherwise Middle Eastern and North African. And I get where both sides of this are coming from. Firstly, it is very important to note that Alabasta is heavily inspired by India as well as Egypt. There's actually this really cool book called Rururu One Piece, which is kind of like a travel guide for the One Piece world. And the Alabasta section focuses heavily on India, pointing out the inspiration for Alabana in particular. So a lot of the locations and architecture are credited as being inspired by India, but also it's pretty undeniable that Egypt and other parts of Africa played a colossal role as well, given that Oda adopted some elements almost one for one. Also, the culture in general, the food, the clothing, etc., very Egyptian. And so I can understand being disappointed, because the big issue that is always going to arise when a production really embraces and prides itself on diversity is that inevitably there is going to be backlash from groups that don't feel represented within the diversity project, especially when their history and culture are being being used to contribute to the world building. To be perfectly honest with all of you, I am neither Egyptian nor Indian. Big shock. And so my knowledge about both of those regions is painfully limited. But I feel like Oda's message to us here is that yes, it's natural to wonder about these things, all of the inspirations and such, but to keep in mind that the Grand Line is an expansive fictional world. Yes, it takes inspiration from the real world, but it's not to be considered one for one. And whether or not that's a satisfactory answer is for you to decide, and wherever you land, fair enough. I don't know if this is just a me thing, but personally, other than architecture, I've never really seen a lot of the real world in One Piece, other than Japan. And that's mostly because each and every character speaks with such flawless Japanese that I've never seen anyone as anything but Japanese. Again, I don't know if that's just a me thing though. And look, my only representation in the series is Jewelry Bonnie, who Oda said would be Australian, and I guess you know what? If we ever get to her and she doesn't speak with the most flawless Sheila accent, then perhaps I too will riot on the internet. But the message continues. Naturally, the distinctive cast members have been assembled from around the world, and I can't help but get excited thinking about how the adventure had already begun. Among those yet to be announced, what about Vivi and Miss All Sunday? What are they doing with Chopper? We can't announce everyone all at once, but starting tomorrow we'll be announcing more cast members over 3 days, August 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. Look out for those, and stay tuned for more exciting updates to come. So that last part kind of annoyed me because yes, we got the announcement of Vivi, but it also implied that there was going to be an announcement of Robin and Chopper, which didn't happen. Instead, we got Kureha, Hirolook, Cobra, and Vivi, which is, it's fine, but also don't mention it if you're not going to do it. But the big thing is, I agree with Oda's question here. What are they doing with Chopper? Because we've discussed the story changes to death, but another harsh reality is that if they can't pull off whatever TV magic is required to bring Chopper to life, then that could sink this ship as well. What they need to do with Chopper is unprecedented, costly, and you better believe that if it doesn't land, then it'll be plastered on every YouTube thumbnail and online article from now until the end of time. And if it does land, then it'll get 15 minutes of polite applause before vanishing. That is the cruelty of the internet. We're now in an era where failures are hyper-focused on and excellence is more or less ignored. But you let me know what you think of season 2 of the live action so far in the comments, and as always, I may or may not read them.